Now, I've mentioned to you before, as you remember, I talked about Woodrow Butter. Now, Woodrow Butter actually married my cousin Peanut's sister. My cousin Peanut, his name, of course, is Peanut Chapel, and Peanut isn't his real name, of course. Nobody would name their child Peanut. Instead, his name was Phineas Chapel, but the woman what delivered him, her name was Lucinda Nutt, and if the family couldn't read and write and they had children without middle names, Lucinda gave them her last name, Nutt, N-U-T-T, as their middle name. So because of that, in the Chapel family, there was a lot of nuts. There was Phineas Nutt Chapel, Peanut, and there was Walter Nutt Chapel, we called him Walnut, and Cornelius Nutt Chapel, we called him Corn Nut, and then there was the little girl. And there's a couple other young'uns that were boys too, but the little girl, her name was Hazel. Hazel Nutt Chapel. Now, when she got married to Woodrow Butter, B-U-D-D-E-R, she became Hazelnut Butter. And that just was a wonderful marriage. And Woodrow became preacher over to the Booger Holler Holiness Church. One Sunday, when everybody was going out, just like folks do down home, the preacher and his wife stand at the door, and everybody comes out and shakes the preacher's hand, whether he did a good job or not. They tell him he did a wonderful job and how blessed they are to have him. And a lady stopped by and she said, "Now, preacher, I got to ask you a real big favor." And he said, "What is that?" And she said, "Well, over on Tejas Creek, there's two ladies, the Collins ladies. Now, they are sister-in-laws, and they're both kind of getting up there in years, and nobody's been out to see them in a long time. And Mrs. Collins, the older one, she's getting kind of sickly. Could you go out one day, since it's real nice weather this summer? The creek's probably dried up. It's about 18, 20 miles up the hill up there, and if you could go up and see Mrs. Collins, she would just appreciate it just so much." And Woodrow said yes. So one Wednesday morning, he got up and he got ready, and he had a little old bowl of cereal because he had a lot to do, and he went over to the church and did a few things, checked on the snake for the snake handling they were going to have on Sunday, and then he got on the road, headed over for Tejas Creek. To say it was a long drive is saying a lot, because it was not only a long drive, but it was kind of like a piece of corn going down through a chicken's gullet and down through its gut and then to its final end, if you know what I mean. Because that road went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth till finally he got to a hill that had to be 45, 50-degree angle going straight up. He had to put his old Ford truck down into low gear as he went up that hill, and the gears ground and the tires spun a couple times when they hit some rock and blew that rock everywhere. But finally at the top of the hill, he saw the little old house where Mrs. Collins lived. He knocked on the door and she said in a real weak voice, "Who is it?" And he said, "Mrs. Collins, this here is Woodrow Butter, the preacher over to Booger Holler Holiness Church." And he got very religious sounding there, Booger Holler Holiness Church. "And I've come to see you and pay you a visit." And she said, "You come on in, preacher. I haven't had any church company in a long time." So he went in, and like a lot of older folks, even though it was July, it was awful daggone hot in that house. She had the fire going in the little fireplace, and she was laying in bed since she was sickly like, and all covered up with 3 or 4 quilts. And of course, Woodrow had on his black Sunday go-to-meeting suit with that white shirt and that real thin black tie that preachers wore back then. And he pulled a chair up beside her bed, and he sat down, and she took him by the hand. And, "Well, preacher, I'm so glad to see you. Tell me what's been going on around the church and down home in our hometown of Beloved, so precious to me and so far away." And he said, "Well, ma'am, I've heard that Bertie Supuvi is doing a real good job over to the school. Children are learning like never before, and they're having all kinds of science projects this year. And my neighbor said their young'un made a volcano out of paper mache and used vinegar and some kind of baking soda to make it explode." "Is that right? Well, what else?" And they gossiped and they talked, and had a real good visit, and Mrs. Collins, not getting too many visitors, went on and on and on. And Woodrow sat there in that hot place, and it had taken him a while to get there, and he got awful hungry. And since Mrs. Collins was bedridden, she said, "Preacher, I would get up and cook you lunch, but I don't have anything much in the fridge right now." He said, "Oh, don't you worry, ma'am. I'm fine right like this." But he was getting a little bit hungry. Well, as he kind of looked around and talked to her, she would close her eyes sometimes and almost doze as she was talking. And Woodrow noticed on her bedside table a cut glass bowl, plumb full of peanuts. And I got to tell you, folks, he looked at those and he just got a little bit of sin in his heart, because he coveted them peanuts. And the more he sat there, and Mrs. Collins kind of talking for a while and falling asleep, but holding his hand the whole time, he thought, man, I could reach over with my other hand and just with 2 fingers and a thumb, just grab a few of those. And he did when it got the best of him, and he put them in his mouth when she was kind of dozing a little bit. And oh, Lossie, nothing tasted better than those 3 or 4 peanuts. And every time she woke up, he would clear his throat and swallow and say, "Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Bless your heart." And he would take more and more and more of them peanuts, until he reached in the bowl as she was dozing and realized they was only 3 or 4 peanuts left. And she woke up and she said, "Now, preacher, I know you're probably needing to go on. I don't want to keep you. I do need my nap, And he said, "Yes, ma'am, but before I go, my guilt has got the best of me." And she said, "What do you mean, preacher?" He said, "Mrs. Collins, I don't know how to tell you. I don't know what to say, because I need to make a confession." And she said, "Well, confess on, sir. Confess on, brother." He said, "While you have been laying there dozing in your illness, I have reached over and I've eaten all but 3 or 4 of your peanuts in that cut glass bowl." "Don't worry about it, young, and don't worry about it," Miss Collins said. He says, "But I do, Mrs. Collins." "Oh, don't you worry about it a bit, honey. I only suck the chocolate off of them anyway." When Woodrow realized what he had done and what she had done, he got up and got ready to leave and thanked her, apologized again. And as he was leaving, Mrs. Collins said, "Now, Woodrow, preacher, as you go down the hill about 3 miles, you'll see a barn on the left. And if you turn up that creek right there, my sister-in-law, Ms. Collins, she's an old maid. She's never been married. And she lives in that little house right down maybe a mile past that barn. Would you stop and see her too?" And he said, "Mrs. Collins, I intended to." He got in his old truck and he drove down. He saw the barn to the left, and he turned and he saw what at first he thought was an old chicken coop, because it weren't much of a house or even a hovel. He got out, and as he got out, this bent-over old lady came out with a shotgun in her hand, and she said, "What do you want?" He said, "Are you Miss Collins?" And she said, "I am. Who's asking?" "Well, ma'am, I'm Brother Woodrow Butter from the Booger Holler Holiness Church down in Beloved." "You are? What are you doing here?" "Well, ma'am, your sister-in-law, Mrs. Collins, asked me to stop by." "Well, that's fine. Come on up and let's talk for a while under the shade of this tree," she said. And they stood there and they talked, and as I mentioned before, it was a hot July day, and he had had all those peanuts. And he said, "Miss Collins, could I ask you for a drink of water?" And she said, "Oh, sure you can." And she went inside and got a bucket and came out, and he noticed that there was a beautiful, beautiful well that was a whole lot nicer than the whole house was that she was living in. And she dumped the water out so she would get some fresh water. And she went over and put a wooden bucket down into that well and pulled up some of the sweetest, coldest, most wonderful well water, they say, in all of Beloved. Poured it into the bucket she had brought from the house, and she realized she had forgotten a glass and forgotten the dipper. And that was actually fine with Woodrow Butter, because as he looked, I don't know that she had washed her hair in a long time, and she had long nails that looked like she had been digging in the dirt because they were just filthy dirty, and she was a chewer. She chewed tobacco the whole time that he talked to her and had little brown spittle kind of hanging down on the sides. And you could tell that she had a little bit of indigestion because she kept on throwing antacid tablets into her mouth. And there was a white ring underneath the brown ring of all that tobacco that she had been chewing and spitting as they talked. And she said, "Oh, I got something here. Don't worry now." And she reached up in the top of that roof over that... Oh, Lawsy, you aren't going to believe this. That little roof, she had an old-time drinking gourd. Long handle that she had grown and cut a hole out of the round part down at the bottom. And as he looked at it, it was brown, just like the tobacco stains around her mouth. And she grinned, and there was one tooth in her head, and it was brown, just like the tobacco. And he really wasn't thrilled about taking a drink. And then he noticed at the end of the handle of that drinking gourd she had grown, there was a hole. I know what I'll do, he thought. He reached that dipper into the water and picked it up and held the handle into his mouth and lifted the dipper up so that all the water drained down the handle through that hole into his mouth. And indeed, everything he ever heard from anyone about that well was true. It was the sweetest water he had ever tasted in his entire life. Oh, Lawsy, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Oh, just wait till I tell my sister-in-law, Mrs. Collins. She ain't going to believe it either. And Brother Woodrow stopped and said, "Ain't going to believe what?" You know what? In all my born days, all the people that have stopped here for a drink, you're the only person up until this point that has ever drunk water out of that gourd exactly the same way that I do.